feeds Pelosi. Off the wall to Harris. Harris has got Pelosi. Harris to Pelosi. Shot. He scores! Chris Pelosi!
And Poitras trying to drive in on that right wing side. Poitras in. Scores! Matt Poitras in overtime.
Willis took it right off his stick. Sends one through. They score! First career goal for the Bruins draft pick, Dom.Hockey.
To the blue line, Cowan has it, looking for the return feed. Cowan lets it go back to the point. Shot! Score!
Those were without all of their World Junior guys for that against Simon Fraser. BC played him Sunday. Good pass ahead. There's Yelvik. He scores! Didn't need an exhibition.
Will come up with it. Ross Schwab flips it out to center. Now McKeen gets chased with Harrison. Harrison to the backhand. Score! A deft touch.
Watch out. Nelson steals. Walks in.
Scores! 6-2.
Jackson Nelson has the hat-trick.
Across the line. Dula wins that back. Now he's going to waltz it.
Welcome in this week to another episode of the Dom.Hockey podcast. I am thrilled to be here with the one and only Dom Tiano with a great, incredible special guest for this episode. Dom, before we bring him on, how are you this week? I know it's time for everybody to put the football down, and let's talk some Bees prospects here.
I'm doing well, thank you, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm super pumped to go through this list of prospects. We talked about it last week. We have joining us this week, Josh Bell from McKeen's Hockey. He is the director of video scouting. Josh, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you? And welcome aboard.
Of course, guys. I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. You mentioned football. It's a tough day today as an Eagles fan, but we're getting through it.
From Mass, I have not watched any football today. I just didn't think it would be worth it. And, I felt like relaxing before coming on the show today. So thanks again for joining us. Dom, I know you are super excited to get into this top 15 prospect list that they published just a couple weeks ago over at McKeen. So I'll let you lead us off, Dom.
Yeah. So, Josh, first of all, thank you for joining us today. Get a different perspective on the Bruins prospects. So I'm going to go right to the list because when I saw that it came out a couple of weekends ago, I was very curious as to who you had number one. And I've been making an argument because I've seen a lot of people put Dean Letourneau at number one. And he's not on your list, and he's not on my list because it's hard going from high school straight to college hockey and not having played a game at that level to really say where he's at. So let's go to who's at number one. And there's going to be a lot of mixed reaction from those watching, and that's Fabian Lysell. Why is he still number one on your list?
Yeah, so this was definitely a conversation for us at McKeen's, and the conversation around Lysell has kind of been the same ever since his draft year. That ceiling is very, very high. There's a lot of risk. I don't think anyone can argue against that, especially at this point, but that ceiling is just so high. There's so much excitement that he brings. For Letourneau, it's the same. However, like you mentioned there, that jump going from St. Andrews College right to the next level, we're going to need to see how he does against some more tough, more difficult, more challenging opposition. That's going to be a true test. At the end of the season, those two could be flipped. I think seeing Letourneau at the next level will be a real test for him, and we'll see where it goes from there. We could be having the opposite conversation a year from now.
Well, a quick question about Lysell, because he's still only 21 years of age. and he was cut today, sent down to Providence. And this is all I'm going to ask you, I promise, about the cuts that were made today. Is that a bad sign for Fabian?
I don't think it's a bad sign. I think he did come in with a lot of hype, a lot of excitement. Everyone wants to see him make the jump to the next level. Having some patience with him, letting him try to have a better year, continue to have a step forward in Providence. I think that's probably worth it. Letting him kind of improve his play off the puck before he is facing NHL competition on a regular basis.
Yeah, I'm not too surprised. I know a lot of people are disappointed in seeing him be sent down, but from at least from my eyes, looking at him these last couple preseason games, slow start. There were flashes, the things that we like to see from him. He had that one particular goal that was a pure snipe shot. It was beautiful, but flashes aren't what keep you in the NHL. It's the consistency. So I would have liked to have seen him maybe get one more game, but I don't. I feel like maybe if you send him down now, he's kind of like a leader down there, and that might help round out some of his game. I don't know what your thoughts are on when the timing of him being sent down and getting that cut.
100%. I think they're going to want him to be the guy in the AHL. They're going to want him to be an offensive leader and just overall leader on that team. The consistency has been an issue for Lizelle since I can remember. There's been international tournaments where he kind of came in and out. He's always good for a highlight reel or two, whether he's playing well or not, so you can always count on that. But being able to fill those gaps when he isn't making a highlight reel play is going to be pretty important for him. So I'm okay with to send him down. I'm okay with the timing. We'll just see how he does. I'm hoping that we can kind of see him get a few games in this year as a call-up. But I would really like to see him be a big player on that team down there.
Dom, do you have anything to add or anything?
No, I couldn't agree more. As a 21-year-old, you can't expect I know Matthew Poitras's an exception to the rule, but you can't expect a 21-year-old to have reached his ceiling at this point. I mean, we saw it with Mason Lohrei, and Mason Lohrei is what, 22?
Yeah.
23, so.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to hear someone else backing what we've said about Dean Letourneau not being the number one, because it would be nice to see him play that next level a little bit there. Dom, do you have anything else on Letourneau or on Lohrei before we jump into number 3 on the list?
No, go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Number 3 on the list, I think some folks are going to be a little surprised with, especially given the preseasons games he's had. You have Brandon Bussey, number 3. Can you walk us through the conversations you had about that? And obviously, being that he's on the older side, he's going to age out of that prospect very soon.
Yeah, for sure. He's right on the cusp of our cutoff. For the past 2 years, he's been a guy that I personally have backed to try and push up our list because I have a lot of time for him. I'm at this point, we're pretty confident that he's an NHL goaltender in some capacity. What that looks like will remain to be determined, but based on his resume, there's not a lot not to like right now. It'll be interesting to see what happens with him this year. Like you mentioned, the preseason hasn't been perhaps what was hoped, but now with Swayman, you've got Korpisalo. It'll be interesting to see what they do with him because I believe he has to go through waivers. So it'll be an interesting decision there.
Yeah, it's, I think in the preseason game with Bussey, as we saw him have issues like rebound control that we didn't see at the AHL level. And I'm just wondering, when you guys sit down and look at that, I'm sure you didn't take one single game into the exhibition game at that and said, we've got to move this guy down because of that. You're obviously looking at the full body of work. But and very rarely do I ask people for comparables, Josh, because I don't like them myself. But what do you think his ceiling is?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. It's still, I want to see him a little bit more in the NHL, but is he far off from maybe that ceiling would be similar to a Korpisalo? I think that's an interesting comparable that isn't that far off, especially with him there. Korpisalo, he could maybe be a starter. Maybe he's better off as a backup. That's kind of the position I see Bussy maybe ending up. I don't know if he's a bona fide starter, but I do think he would be a solid backup and potentially even a 1B.
That's fair. I know a lot of people got really excited after some flashes that he showed in last year's preseason games, but it's like Dom said, the rebound control this year has definitely looked to be an issue. Now, obviously, with Mike Dunham and Bob Asenza, we've seen other goaltenders have rebound control get it together. So I'm really excited to see where he goes, and I hope he has another couple preseason games under his belt this year so we can see it. I know we'll get to DiPietro a little bit more later, but what do you see between the two that's different? I know Dom has described DiPietro as more of a like
acrobatic.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Less about like just more about just getting the puck saved, kind of like what we used to see out of a Tim Thomas versus Bussy, who's a little bit more of that Tuukka Rask style where he's better positioned, wants to be in front of play, and gets himself there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Messi's the more technically sound goaltender, where DiPietro is the more athletic goaltender. I think that's a great way to put it. And it's interesting, we're talking about rebound control in the preseason. We had that as a strength of his ahead of, this was obviously, of course, before the preseason. So to see him kind of struggle, it makes me think that maybe he's nervous, maybe there's something else going on, because we've seen him be good at swallowing up pucks in the past. So hopefully that's a quick bounce back, and we'll see it in Providence, or we'll see it however we do. But yeah, I think your comparison between the two netminders is perfect.
Good
Dom,
stuff.
Anything else, Dom, on Bussy before we continue to take down the list here?
No, I'm ready to have those watching lose their minds on this next one again. Because he really didn't have a good camp. And that's Georgi Merkulov. He again showed flashes, but I'm really surprised because being older, 23, soon to be 24, I thought he would have taken the bull by the horns. And we just didn't see it. So I still like his upside. I still think he should be up there on this list. But the thoughts on Merkulov, Josh?
Yeah, this is a guy that I would have bet to make this roster. So obviously seeing the camp, seeing it sent down today, not ideal. But I, like you said, I like his upside. I think this is a guy that will play in the NHL, play for a long time. So what might end up happening, potentially he's an early call up for an injury, and then he sticks. That's kind of something that I could see happen with him, because like I said, I was willing to put money down that he would have made that opening night roster. So seeing him sent down, not ideal, but I don't think it'll be long before we see him back.
Now, do you see him making it in the NHL as a center, as a left wing? And I know Dom and I haven't seen any footage of it, but there was a lot of talk over the last few weeks about him battling for a right wing position. Have you seen any video of him playing the right wing at all?
I have not, actually. I did a dive on him last year for McKeen's, I believe, and he was all center though. I think he probably moves to the wing. Don't get me wrong, he's a great play driver, creative playmaker. I think he could play center, but I just see him playing off the boards a little bit better than having to play that two-way pivot role.
Interesting, because I would have thought, just because of the way the Bruins have utilized him, both in this exhibition and in Providence, that they want to develop him down the middle. That said, with Matthew Poitras coming onto the scene a year ago, it probably gave him less of a chance to play down the middle. So I can see why you would think that he's probably better off on the wing.
Yeah, there's only so many spots to go around, right? So
Yeah.
I think he'll have to make that work if he's to stick in the system.
I wonder if the cut that he got today go down to Providence. To me, it'll be a little interesting to see how they use him down there, to see if maybe they kick him over to the wing and get him a little bit more used to the wing before that call up that you're talking about for an injury or something. So let's see. Do we have anything else on Merkulov, Dom?
No, I think Josh covered it pretty well there.
All right. Now, the next player, number 5 on your rankings, he stood out to me. I think it was the first preseason game a little bit. He came out, was feisty. I liked what I saw from him. Obviously didn't look NHL ready, but again, someone that when the injuries happen, you have John Farinacci at 5. I would expect, at least in my opinion, to see him get a cup of coffee in the NHL this year, maybe towards the end as like a thank you kind of game at the end of the year if they have the cap space to do it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if you're looking at our top 15 rankings and if you were to tier it out, this is kind of where there might be a bit of a break. I would see Farinacci more as a bottom 6 guy, maybe middle 6. But exactly what you said, he's that tenacious forward that is just going to be hard on pucks. I feel like when you look at guys that play a Bruin style of game, he's one of the guys you want. He's a great fit in this team, and he's one of those guys that coaches love him because you can throw him on the ice in whatever situation and he can do anything. You can rely on him in any situations. You won't get those highlight reel plays that you get from Lozelle or some of the other guys, but he's dependable. So I like him.
Well, I got to say, Josh, when I did my rankings way back at June the 1st, Letourneau wasn't on my list, obviously, because they hadn't drafted him yet. And Bussy wasn't on my list because I had deemed him aged out for the way I do it. So I had Lysell, Merkulov, and Farinacci in that order. So I'm glad somebody else is seeing what I see in Farinacci. I love the kid. I just love the way he plays the game. I thought he had a good camp in Boston for, he started out in Providence last year as like gangbusters, but never playing more than 30 games in a season at any level. He hit the wall and then, completely dropped off. So I'm glad you got Farinacci there. And we also agree on the next guy on your list. I absolutely love this guy, Oscar Yelvik. Your thoughts on him, and what was the thought process at putting him at number 6?
Yeah, I think if you look at the time since he's been drafted, he's just done nothing but continue to develop and take leaps and bounds forward. So that's what we really like about him. I think when you look at between the draft year and now, seeing that ceiling rise, I think that's just a really positive sign. So the development is something that really stood out to us, and just his ability to slow the game down, to be able to see plays before they're happening, to create time and space, not just for himself, but for his teammates. He just really tends to stand out. So he's a guy that we really like.
So without Cutter Gauthier this year, do you think, how do I want to say this? Do you think he can drive the line at the college level?
I do. Because of that vision and intelligence that he shows, I think he can do that. To the extent that we've seen with Gauthier, probably not. But I think more than enough he'll be able to handle himself and driving that line and creating offense still.
I'm excited to see him this year at BC.
Yeah,
I know
for
I'm
sure.
looking forward to it. So I don't think there's anything that I have to add on Yelvik. I think, Dom, that was the only question that I had, so you stole that one from me. But I am looking forward to getting your thoughts, Josh, on who you guys have at number 7. You guys have Justin Brazeau. Now, coming out of last year, with what I saw in the postseason games, I felt he was getting beat to pucks, beat along the boards, losing puck battles. That's what I wanted to see him come into camp and kind of work on. Obviously, everybody is going to talk about his skating ability or lack thereof. Like, how did that skating ability kind of factor into placing him on the higher end in the top 10, really? And then what do you see like his ceiling being for a guy like Justin Brazeau? Because some people are trying to pencil him in on the second line right wing next to Coyle and Marchand, and I'm like, I just don't see it.
Yeah, no, for sure. The nice thing about his style of play is that he could play up and down the lineup, but you're right that the skating is definitely an issue, and it likely always will be. The one thing that personally I always say about skating, though, is that it can be improved. You look at like a guy like Mark Stone, you look at a guy like Bo Horvat, their skating got better. They completely changed their game with that, but they brought those skills that they already had. So I never count a guy out just because they're a bad skater. And especially when they have the competitiveness that he brings, I would tend to bet on those guys and say that they're going to figure it out. So that's why we have him in the 7 spot. And plus the story that he's got, working up through the ECHL to the AHL, working all the way up, you can't hate that story. So I wouldn't put him on the second line, but I do think he could be a third line, fourth line grinder who, if needed, he could play up. Would he be like a Zach Hyman in Edmonton? Not to that extent, but that type of player.
Yeah, and he has improved his skating. And, Bruins fans should go back to Milan Lucic after his first or second year, who went and put in a hell of a lot of work in the offseason to work on his skating. And we saw a vast improvement. Kevin Miller is another one who worked with the skating coach for one summer, and we saw a drastic improvement. So like you said, Josh, skating can always be improved. One thing I know about Brazeau is, and this going back to his days with the North Bay Battalion in the OHL, effort is never a question when it comes to him. And he'll put that effort into his skating.
Yeah, and you even mentioned it after one of the preseason games earlier in our conversation a couple weeks ago, Dom. He does have that improvement this year. I'm not rooting against the guy. I didn't like what I saw in the postseason last year. I'm glad he came in this year, having improved it. I need to see, in my opinion, I need to see a little bit more to ensure that he makes this roster out of camp this year. I think he can do it. And then obviously, like you guys said, skating can be taught. It's just a matter of how much effort you put into it. And I mean, Dom, we've had the conversation, Christian Konstantinsky, another guy who can't skate for his life, but has had improvements since the Bruins have drafted him. So another one, though. Anything else on Brazeau, Dom, or
No.
any other thoughts, Josh, on Brazeau that you wanted to add?
I would just say that maybe the skating is still an issue, but if he can skate to that front of the net position, you're good to go.
Yeah, because I think every one of his goals were scored within 2 feet of the blue paint last season. So, if he can get there.
He ain't
Moving on to number 8. I mean, I love this guy. I've loved this guy for a couple of years now. Yeah, bound to be a fan favorite in Boston. He's got a lot of tools. Correct me if I'm wrong, Josh. Don't expect a lot of offense from him, but
Correct.
expect a solid two-way game with energy.
Yeah, exactly. The ceiling isn't high offensively for him, but the tools that he brings, he's got the speed, he's got the strength, he's got some two-way ability. He's gonna be more of a role player, a guy that can work the penalty kill. You want him out there on defensive faceoffs. He's another guy that you can rely on. And so, yeah, he's not going to be one up there with Lizelle potting goals, but he'll be a fan favorite, like you said.
Yeah, and I love what I've seen from him. Riley Duran, I just don't see him making the jump right now. I don't know if you guys have seen anything in this camp to say he's one of the, we'll say, top 6 bottom sixers in this camp, but I think maybe next year he could be someone to really look at based on what I've seen, especially for that kind of role.
Yeah, for sure. I think he needs at least a year in the AHL before we even start having that conversation of if he should stick. I think it'll be important to see how his game translates, how he does production wise, because he'll have to chip in offensively a little bit. So being able to see how he stacks up will be pretty telling of what future he may have.
Let's see. Dom, anything else on Riley?
No, I covered it pretty well. It's just
So-
being a fan favorite is enough for me because I've been saying it for a couple of years now. So
I think people are going to love him once he gets there and sticks. He's going to be. You'll see a few Durant jerseys in the Garden walking around. So
Sure.
we mentioned number 9 earlier on the list when we were talking about Brandon Bussey. At number 9, you guys have Michael DiPietro, whose story is, I think, a little less known to some Boston fans. And I think his play in preseason has probably come as a little bit of a surprise to some fans. Obviously, came over in the Jack Studnicka trade, kind of had a wasted year during the COVID season by being on the what did they call it? Was it the taxi squad or whatever? Yep. And so didn't really see any NHL games, didn't see any AHL games. What are you guys seeing from DiPietro that maybe other people are not to really want to see more from him?
Yeah, so coming from the OHL, he was the top goaltender there. He was just so promising. And I think he was rushed in Vancouver to hit the NHL a little bit too fast. And then, like you said, the COVID and being on the taxi squad, his development has not been handled the best to this point. So he's a guy that I don't think you can count him as a 100% an NHL goaltender, but he's a guy that you'll want to wait and see to see what happens. I think he has that potential still. I think if he can figure out the technical aspects of his game to just be a little bit more controlled at times, then his chances increase. Like we talked about earlier, the athleticism is very promising. He knows how to make a dive to keep the puck out of the net. But in terms of keeping it controlled, that's what we'll want to see moving forward.
Yeah, I want to ask you a question, Josh. It's a little bit off topic because we've now talked about 2 goalies on this list. So how much of an effect do goalie coaches have on these goaltenders? Like with Bussey, DiPietro, we've got Bob Essenza and Mike Dunham as goalie coaches. And we've seen with our own eyes the difference in DiPietro going from the Vancouver organization to the Boston organization. So I know there's fans out there that don't think it's a big deal, but I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, you might notice the goaltender helmet there behind me. It's huge. Having a goalie coach that understands the goalie versus just a goaltender coach that has experience. If you can't understand the student, the goalie, If you can't understand how they learn, then they're not going to. So having the right goalie coach, being able to adapt their teaching style is huge for a goalie, especially because the position is so mental. You want to have a guy that if you need to be pushed, they'll push you. If you need to hear the positives, they'll give you the positives. So that's why that adaptation is so important.
Good stuff. I like to hear it because I think at every level that you're at, whether you're in junior, you're in college, DHL level, NHL level, you need a good goal coach at every level. I know the best guys are in the pro ranks, but there's some good goalie coaches in junior, like the DHL, the USHL, and I don't think those guys are being given enough credit.
Yeah,
Chris?
for sure. NCAA too.
Yeah, NCAA as well.
Yep. We've seen a number of good goaltenders there as well. I think before we move on to number 10 on the list, the last question I have, now that we have both goaltenders kind of side by side, if you will, if they both kind of get to the ceiling. I mean, it sounds like the floor for Bussy is probably a little higher. But then again, like you said, coming out of the OHL, DiPietro was ranked so high. If they both are able to find their game and get back to their peak performance, we talked about Bussy kind of being maybe that 1B kind of guy. What would be DiPietro's probably peak, if you will?
If he reaches it, it'd probably be the same. I think with DiPietro, it's the floor is a little bit lower. So I think that's the big difference between them. I could see him, he's probably closer to a backup than a 1B, but it's not that far off.
Okay. Interesting. So, go ahead, Chris.
You go ahead.
Well, I was going to move on to number 10.
We can do.
I've liked this guy for several years, way back to his days with the London Knights. Big defenseman, shutdown defenseman who's displayed some offensive abilities and some decent physicality in Alec Regula. Thoughts? Because you have him a little bit higher than I did. Your thoughts on putting him there?
For sure. I think guys like him tend to get overlooked because they're not going to bring that offensive game that's going to jump off the page. But the other assets that he brings, the size, the reach, the physicality, we're pretty confident that he's going to be a steady NHLer. It might be a bottom pairing guy, which is likely. But the way that he moves, his four-way mobility, again, that physicality is quite impressive. So we're pretty confident in him.
Interesting. Unfortunately, he's been injured through training camp, so we never got to see him in a preseason game or two. Chris, anything on Regula?
He's another one I'm looking forward to seeing in Providence here. Obviously, as your article points out, tough for him to crack that NHL roster this year. I mean, we kind of know who those 7 are. For me, if there is an injury or when there's an injury, it'll be very interesting to see who that first call-up is going to be. A couple guys are going to have to worry about the waiver wire, so that'll definitely come into effect on it as well. So just, in my opinion, seeing how they navigate some of the guys that you may want to call up, but you don't want to risk the waiver wire, so you maybe leave them down.
Yeah.
That's the dance that I'm looking forward to seeing, not to mention how much they can grow their game from game 1 through the end of the season down in Providence. I mean, I think that defense in Providence is going to be almost as good in the AHL as Boston's defense is going to be in the NHL, honestly.
It'll be strong, yeah. And you're right. I was prepping and looking at all the guys that have to go through waivers, and there's definitely going to be some tough decisions throughout the season.
I'm wondering if that played into a part. I mean, Dom, you and I will talk about it more on tomorrow's show, but the cuts that were made today, I'm sure the waiver wire had
always does.
Yeah. Anything else on Regula for you, Dom?
No, I want you to bring up the next guy because I'm in total disagreement with this one, Josh. So,
Number 11, you guys have another Boston College player in Andre Gasol. So before, I know we've heard Dom's thoughts, but we'll have him recap them after. What were your discussions at McKeen's kind of placing him higher than some of these other guys on this list? And how did you end up landing on number 11 for Gasol?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the role that he's been in Boston College has been a bottom six role primarily. So we've seen the two-way ability. We've seen that he can be a strong pivot. So now that he's likely to move into that top six, I think he'll, like we said, he'll take on some more offensive responsibility. So I think it'll just be very telling to what that ceiling could be. I just don't think we've seen enough to really kind of solidify the ceiling or the floor. So that's why I think the ceiling is a little bit higher, because there is still that potential that we saw back in his draft year. The role that he has been playing, I think, plays a significant part in, we'll call it, a lack of development. I don't think it is a lack of development. I think we might see a big step forward this year.
Dom, I want to hear your disagreements on that. My real quick before we do, though, would you say kind of similar to how maybe being in a bottom six role affected maybe someone like Johnny Beecher when he was at Michigan?
Yeah, for sure.
Just with less time to get back into the top six?
Yeah. Yeah,
so Dom,
that's good.
You said
so
you did.
I can understand your thinking and the thought process, Josh, but he did spend a lot of time with Oscar Jelvik last season. And we saw Jelvik go up and Gasol's production come down over the previous season. I may be way off here. So I'm going to trust your judgment. But I see a path similar to what Justin Brazeau took for Andre Gasol. Am I way off?
I don't think so. I think that's definitely in the conversation still. Like I said, the ceiling and floor are still wide apart, so we could go either way. I think in our ranking, we're leaning more towards the ceiling though, and the potential, pushing aside some of those risks that we think he'll be able to overcome.
Okay, well, I admit you kind of swayed me a little bit. Kind of. Not 100%, but you swayed me a little.
Okay, perfect.
Next guy, another one of my favorites, and being an OHL guy, everybody says to me, is like, how can these NCAA guys be your favorites? Well, because I watch them both. Yeah, I cover the OHL, but it's not that I can't watch NCAA hockey and enjoy it. But I love this guy's game. He's another guy that's going to be a fan favorite in Boston. Had a really good camp in Trevor Kuntar. Thoughts on him?
Yeah, for sure. I think every year when the Bruins are adding guys, I always think, yeah, that fits the mold. And this is a guy that does fit the mold. He brings that physical power game. He's not afraid to get dirty in the corners. He brings some offensive ability. He's a guy that I think is closer than maybe people might expect. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get a chance at some point, whether it's maybe later this year, and stick, because he does have that game that I just think coaches will love, and I think he could make an impact.
He was my dark horse to make the team this year until they went out and signed all those free agents. So I agree with you 100% there.
Yeah, Dom, you were talking about him months ago, and I think that started to permeate a little bit into Bruins Nation, because people are still talking about him trying to be a dark horse out of camp. And I feel like you said, Josh, he's almost there. Like it's within reach for him, but just a little bit more time to percolate in the American Hockey League won't hurt him.
Yeah, for sure.
That he plays. And then obviously someone else, Dom, anything else on Kuntar? I know how much you love his drive, his tenacity, and his passion to push for the next level.
No. Well, I do have one question. Whose upside is higher, Riley Duran or Trevor Kuntar?
I would probably lean Duran, but I don't think the gap is that wide.
Okay.
I might eat those words in the near future, but that's what I'll say for now.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, just based on what we've seen in the preseason, I mean, they both look pretty close, similar, same style. Hell, they could be line mates in a couple seasons. I would be okay with that. Next on the list, though, another NCAA center out my way, UMass, a little bit further west for me, though. Dan Lockmellis, someone that I'm looking forward to try to get out to see some games of in person. What are your thoughts on him, as he obviously missed out on camp because he had to go to the NCAA?
Yeah, for sure. He's a guy that I used to love watching internationally. He always he's a guy that he's one of those guys that I just want to believe in. I want to believe that he'll continue to make it. So I think for him, just patience will be key. He'll likely be a bottom six guy, maybe even a bottom line guy. But I think that he's on the right track. This season will be really telling to see how he can take that step forward. I'm not going to say it'll be a make or break, but it'll be just very telling as to what's to come from him. So this season will be interesting.
Well, it's funny you mentioned you love watching him internationally because he's played a lot of international hockey.
Yeah.
But I watch him, Josh, and I wonder, because of the centers that the Bruins have. I mean, Lindholm's there now for 7 years. Matt Patra is on an entry-level contract. So is Johnny Beecher. Who knows what they do with Charlie Coyle? Dean Letourneau will be coming up, hopefully. I just have not seen anything in Lockmellis's game that says he can play wing. I think he's superb down the middle, but I wonder where there's room with this franchise.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think perhaps the hope is he has a big year and he becomes a trade asset. Because you're right, I don't really see him changing his game. I feel like the game he plays is likely what we'll get. Mm-hmm. So if he has a big year, he could be an interesting trade piece moving forward.
I'd be interested to see what they can get for him, especially if he does up that game a little bit, because he is still so young. He is such a good piece down the middle. And Dom, we've had that conversation where it's just where does he fit in this organization? So
yeah,
I know I'll be looking forward to see him make that push. But sometimes you draft guys that help you get different pieces down the road. So with that, anything else on Lockmellis, Dom?
No, I want to get to this next guy who's a bit of an enigma.
So do I.
So Josh, Brett Harrison. I mean, I tweeted out a year before the Bruins drafted him. I have found a picture of him as a kid in a Bruins jersey, and I said, I hope the Bruins keep their draft picks and draft this kid next year. That said, and I said this to Chris, the first development camp he went to. I said, my issue with him is his compete level and his willingness to engage, because all the tools are there. I said, you watch him go into a corner or along the boards, and all he tries to do is make stick checks rather than take the body.
And boy, did that stand out.
I think his potential, if he reaches his potential, he should be higher on this list. At least that's where I had him. So your thoughts on Brett Harrison?
Yeah, so I have honestly never really been a Harrison fan. I think there's just a lot to work on. I think he could still be a long-term project. I think there is potential if everything comes together, but even the aspects of his game that stand out, they still need to improve a great deal for him to make an impact at the NHL level. I think we've talked about skating, but skating is an issue. Like you mentioned, there's that lack of physicality that has always kind of stood out in his game, even despite his size and his style of play. You'd expect the physicality, and it's just never quite there. And there's plays where you're watching him, you're thinking, why didn't you lay the body down? Why didn't you get in the corner? Why didn't you try a little bit harder? That being said, I mean, we've talked about it with all these guys. Patience is key. So I think he'll definitely need some time. And at that point, maybe he's just a depth guy that earns a call every now and then. But yeah.
Well, appreciate the honesty. I mean, that's what people want to hear, is an honest opinion and what goes into the thought process.
Yeah,
Dom, for sure.
Oh, sorry, Dom. You and I mention it all the time. That's what we focus on here, is just giving the honest truth, our honest opinions. And yeah, I remember when I first noticed that lack of physicality at that development camp. It seemed to be a little bit better coming into camp this year, but I just haven't really seen much of the desire to get physical in the preseason. But I mean, he can rip the puck on net, though. I got to give him credit where it's due. That shot is fantastic. I hope he can get everything else together, because, I mean, the ceiling, I feel like, could be much higher for him. It's just, if you're not willing to engage at this point when you're fighting for the NHL, when are you going to?
Yeah, exactly.
Dom, anything else on
No, I think we got an honest opinion and can't argue with it.
I can't argue with it at all. I got the same feeling. So last but not least, in the top 15, you guys have a 2024 fifth round pick in Jonathan Morello. Walk us through how he got so high so quick to make the top 15 in his draft year.
Yeah, for sure. So this is both a case of how much we like Morello and a case of, I mean, we did rank the Bruins prospect pool 31st. So maybe a testament to the depth a little bit as well. But for Morello, I think we're looking for a similar thing as Letourneau. Morello played in the OJHL. We're going to want to see how he does against some stronger competition. But we're betting on the skills that he brings. So it's almost a similar package with a lower ceiling to Letourneau. He has the size, he has the speed, he has the ability to create offense. So it'll be really interesting to see how he does against the next level. I believe he's going to the USHL this year, so I'm more curious to see how he does in the NCAA. I think that'll be a real test. But he could be having a big year this year.
He's off to a good start in the first 3 games. I wish I had your draft guide open in front of me, but I don't, Josh, because people were asking me about Morello before the draft and whether the Bruins would be looking at him in the 5th round. And my answer was no, because I simply didn't believe he would be available. I thought he was a late 3rd round pick. I think you guys had him ranked in the 4th.
I'm just taking a look here. We had him ranked 100th.
Oh, that high. Okay. So you had him even higher than I did then.
Yeah. So he's
we're
just outside the 3rd. Yeah, he's still 4th.
So we're around the same spot then. So
yeah,
I was shocked when they were able to grab him when they did. I believe in his upside like you do. I think in the 3 games that he's played so far, he's handling himself very well. His 200-foot game is still there. But I want to go to something you said when you were talking about him, and that is that you have the Bruins ranked 31st out of 32 teams.
Oh, you
Yeah.
got
And I'm not going to argue that point because you're probably right. But in my discussions, when people want to touch on the conversation, it's like, well, yeah, you've got to look at it. The Bruins don't have those blue chip prospects. They're always finishing high in the standings and not getting the picks to get those guys. But here's my argument, and this doesn't always play a role when you're trying to determine who has the best prospect pool. You give me the Bruins bottom half of their prospects, the ones that are, bottom six players or bottom pair defensemen, and I will put them up against anybody else's in the NHL anytime. Your
Yeah,
thoughts on it?
no, I think it's fair. I think the ranking is due to like what you said about not really having those top prospects. A big part of our system going into this is we actually build out our top 300 prospects first.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, that's when we get into ranking the organizations. So I think Lizelle, it's in here. Lizelle was the top and he was 74th. So it really comes down to who has more prospects that are for sure things that are going to be superstars, that are going to be stars, that are going to be top six guys, that are going to be middle six guys. And it's really putting those pieces together. So I agree. There's a lot of guys in the line, in the ranking that I like, that I've got faith in. It really just comes down to you're missing a tier or even two on the top.
that all-star, that elite player, franchise player, as they're called. But it's funny that we say they're missing one, and they might actually have one. And I do want to bring up one of Kevin's questions here because he mentions them. And I'm curious if you could touch on what you guys use for metrics as to what makes someone a prospect to qualify, because Matthew Poitras is not on this list, and he is obviously still 20 years old. So what prevents him from being a prospect on this list to maybe affect those rankings? I don't think it would move him up from 31, but maybe.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to have to kind of pull it up here. I know I was just looking at it today because we were just talking about changing our rules. So players under 26 years of age as of September 15th, 2024, who have appeared in less than 60 games and less than 25 in one season.
Okay, so that explains why Poitras is on the list.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask you about a player, Josh, that is not on your list?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I thought he had a good development camp, and I fully understand that he's got a lot of work to put in, and that's Frederic Brunet.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
So
for sure. So I think he's definitely a mobile defenseman. He moves well. I do like his playmaking ability. I think just as a defender, we question his ability to defend at the NHL level. We haven't really seen physicality from him. I think he can struggle with defending against speed as well. So I think if he adds some strength, if he can develop that defensive awareness and that backward skating pace, he could be a guy. It's just a little bit more of a project in my eyes.
Yeah, because he's added the physicality part. That much I will give him.
Okay.
The rest you're bang on. I think he made a conscious effort to be more physical because he was in the preseason. But I will give you the other stuff you talked about. I have a hard time understanding where his IQ is at. I think he's a guy who wants to put in the work. So I think that the skating aspect of it will come along. The defensive awareness is all part of the hockey IQ, and I'm not sure where that's at.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think him and Jonathan Meyerberg were right kind of off that list right at the end. I know he's a guy that I like too. And so I think for both of them, that factored in.
Okay.
Can I ask about two players not in the organization anymore?
Sure.
So they were both players that the Bruins elected to have their rights expire or not re-sign. One of them more recently was Reed Dick, and the other one was Matthias Mantakivi. Was there anything in their games that you guys saw as to why maybe the Bruins just opted not to keep them in the organization and continue those players' developments?
In fairness, I was going to ask about Reed Dick, and I didn't want to put Josh on the spot. And I was also going to ask about Mantakivi because 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, McKeen's, as so did I, McKeen's had him ranked as one of the top 5 prospects drafted in the NHL outside the NHL.
Interesting. I don't have a lot on Mankivi, to be honest. But for Dick, I do think, just looking over my notes here, sorry. The biggest thing for him, which I think factors into the Bruins, is consistency. I think the Bruins want to see guys that, as they progress, you see that consistency in their game. You don't want to see them take the foot off the gas ever. And so because they do have a lot of guys in various positions that could make the jump. And I mean, they've had a lot of guys go through that maybe people weren't so sure about. Look at Mason Lohrei. I think there's a lot of people when he got drafted that were saying, why would you draft him? And now look at him. So I think you can't really bet against the Bruins drafting. They draft well. And so when they move on from a guy, you kind of feel pretty confident that they no longer fit in the system.
Can I get you to repeat that so I can? There are so many people around here who want to just completely demolish the job that the scouting department has done, the drafting that Don Sweeney has been able to put together.
It's all based on 2015.
I know, but I just want to have the clip.
Yeah, if you take 2015 out, there's not a whole lot you can argue against. I mean, every team makes mistakes. Every team has a 2015. But I think you look at the guys outside the first round that tend to hit, and that's how you really weigh a drafting organization. So I think you compare to most teams, I feel like you should be pretty happy right now in the past decade.
I mean,
I think The Athletic did an article in the salary cap world since 2005. The Bruins were the 4th best drafting team in that period. So kind of off the wall question here, Josh. And I think back to the model the Detroit Red Wings used years and years ago, and the Bruins are starting to do that. Is it possible that you can be letting your prospects percolate too long? Like, for instance, they try to keep their players in Providence for as long as possible. Can that hurt a player, in your opinion?
Yes, I think it can. I think there does get to a point where you can only grow so much in the AHL level where you do need to make that jump. And that being said, I will always preach patience in a prospect. We've just seen too many guys on every team get rushed. So I would rather somebody sit in the AHL too long than move up to the NHL too soon.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I feel like you're less likely to quote unquote ruin the player if they're there too long, because usually that means there's an aspect of the game that they can find again, versus if you get them and you push them too quick, then there's a part of their game that just never developed, and it just won't be there. Yeah,
if you move them up too soon, you can hurt their confidence. and they think they can't play at that level, and that can completely ruin them. But if you keep them in the AHL too long, at the same point, you kind of risk them. It gets too easy for them. And so at that point, when they do make the jump, it's a little bit harder to make the jump. So there's cons to both, but I'd rather have some guys wait and fight for the spot.
So, Josh, here's a question here. David Palmer asks. By the way, if anybody has a question for Josh and the Bruins prospects, just drop it in the comments section. Let's not make it about the cuts the Bruins made today. That's not what he's here for. But Josh, in your opinion, the top 5 organizations with the highest top prospects, I guess.
Yeah. So we just released our the top last couple days. So starting from number 5, just pulling it up here, we've got the Seattle Kraken. Number 4, Anaheim Ducks. Number 3 are the Detroit Red Wings. Number 2, Montreal Canadiens. And at number 1, we have the San Jose Sharks.
Now, do you personally agree with those, or was that just what you guys at McKeen's settled on?
That was kind of built off of our template that we built to figure it out. I do agree with it, though. I think it does fit. I would, it'll change very quickly once Celebrini is no longer considered a prospect, but I agree with it for now.
I mean, they still have some other really young, talented players in the organization. I think probably don't fit your list. So it is funny how you draw that line. And I know you mentioned it. You guys were discussing maybe redrawing that line. What goes into the decision as to, okay, like you said, 25 games in a season? Why is it 25 in a single season versus, 50 in a single season versus 60 over 2 seasons? Like, how do you guys come up with those metrics?
Yeah, I think that's just been a rule that's been in place for a while, and we've kind of just stuck to it to remain consistent. I know this summer we were discussing about possibly changing that up a bit because there's some guys that maybe we shouldn't consider. Some guys maybe get missed. So it's in discussion, but I think I've been with McKeen's for 2 years now, maybe a little longer. And that's just always been the cutoff for us.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit, Josh, if you can explain your role as director of video scouting, because we're seeing more and more NHL teams investing more money into video scouting, and maybe you can tell us the process, what it entails, and everything behind the job.
Yeah, for sure. So it's going to be a little bit different for me versus an NHL video scout, but for an NHL guy, typically their job would be you've got your regional scouts and they all come forward with their lists. When you're combining that list, there's going to be a lot of discussions about who goes over who. And that's where the video scout would come in and say, okay, these are the top 5 guys that we're having conversations about that a team doesn't agree on. I'm going to go take a look at those guys. And then that's how they kind of sort out those last decisions. And so that's kind of what my role's been. It's a little bit of a jack of all trades role with McKeen's, though. So focusing on the drafts as a video scout, but also doing a lot of prospect work, even some NHL work every now and then.
Kevin's got a question here.
This is interesting.
In your opinion, for the success of the Bruins organization over the past 2 decades, are you impressed with Don Sweeney and the scouting staff at their drafting, or do you think he should be hitting on more draft picks?
No, I'm impressed. I think there's guys that maybe at the time that they were picked, I was kind of thinking that seems strange, and then it pans out. So I'm impressed with it. I can't hate on it too much. Thinking back of the Bruins 2015 aside.
Well, I mean, it's though, because even with 2015, I've always been of the mindset that they still picked 3 solid NHL players. They still picked DeBrusque, Carlo, and even Jeremy Lauzon is panning out. So, like, I mean, if I were to tell you that here's a general manager and his staff that's going to hit on a guaranteed 30% of their draft picks, they will be quality NHL players. I feel like most teams would sign right away and just say, we'll take it and we'll go with it.
Yeah, I agree. With that track record is just impressive to see that sort of turnaround. Most teams don't get that, and that's just the excitement of the draft.
Kevin's follow-up comment, same thing I was mentioning, just so many people in the Bruins fan base just say Sweeney can't draft. But as Dom pointed out, it's all because of the 2015, and it's not even the 2015 draft, it's the first round.
Yeah. So much of it is based on how well they do in the regular season. When you're always picking in the bottom half of the draft, you're not going to get those guys that make an impact the next season. You've got to be patient with them. And the fact that they've had those guys pan out is a testament to the drafting.
Yeah, for sure. And then I know Kevin had also mentioned Matt Poitras. He had a question about like success on the wing versus down the middle, stuff like that. Kind of what made him. And let me see. Let me just try to find it here. Right here. Thoughts on Matt Poitras being successful on the wing versus at center at the NHL level?
Yeah, I think with the style of play that he brings, he can really be successful anywhere. I think that tenacity, that pedal to the metal play that he brings, and the intelligence on the ice. I think you can put him anywhere and he'll succeed. He'll play however you need him to play. So I have got a lot of time for him.
Josh, I just thought of another player I needed to ask you about.
Yep.
Because when you were talking about Reed Dick, you said that teams want to see consistency. And going back to the NCAA goaltender Philip Svedback, I thought that last season he took a step back. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I find that he struggles with speed. So when the offense is in front of him and moving quickly, he loses the pucks too much. So I think if he can really build on that lateral movements and on the vision, then there could be potential there. I just think at this point in his timeline, I'm not positive how that's going to turn out, because that's a pretty big thing that I'd like to see him improve on. And just his overall footwork could be a little bit better.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like this would be a big year for him. And then actually it's funny because there were two others in that I wanted to mention too that weren't on the list. You mentioned Svedback, but along the same lines as consistency, needing to take a step forward, transferred colleges this year, Ty Gallagher. Have you guys followed him a lot? What have been your thoughts if you have? And then, like, did you see anything more than just a difference in utilization in his game last year?
Yeah, he's a guy that we just haven't loved the development. We haven't loved seeing. How do I put this? I think we're just hoping for more every season, hoping that he would take the next step, and it's a bit more of a plateau. So for us, a little cautious. I think that I know back in his draft year, we talked about how he had an aggressive style of play. And I think with the risk, we're just not entirely seeing the reward that it brings as well. Again, I can be proven wrong here. But yeah, I'm not sure for him that there's an NHLer there.
Okay. No, that's fair, because I know last year. Yeah, because it seemed like he just fell out of service in what was it, BU last year. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the change of scenery can do for him. Maybe it gives him kind of a kick in the pants and lights a fire underneath him. But like you said, it's just not, there's a lot left to be desired there. And then the one that everybody wants to see in Providence this year, making the jump from the London Knights, defenseman Jackson Edward. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, for lack of a better term, sociopath who's not afraid to take your head off.
Yeah, he's another guy that I don't know. I think he's going to be an entertaining player, but he might be an entertaining player at the AHL level. I'm just not sure we're going to see him at the NHL level. He might be a guy, though, that earns a call up. I know there's plenty of people saying that that tough game is coming back a little bit. If it were to, maybe he does get a call up on a fourth line, but I wouldn't hold my breath with him.
So what sort of things in his game do you think are going to hold him back from making it from the AHL to the NHL?
I just don't think there's a whole lot of offensive potential there. I just really think it's going to be capped. I think his physicality is likely going to be the one thing that carries him. But we'll just need to see more of his game round out.
Interesting.
Yeah, he's definitely a long-term project. I know some people are saying, "Oh, he could make the roster next year," but no, he's not making the roster next year.
Yeah, I don't see that happening, but I've been wrong plenty before.
Let's see. I'm just sifting through some of the comments to see if there were any other questions. Dom, did you have any other players or?
No, I think I think Josh has covered it well. What I want to do is tell the listeners that like I mentioned at the beginning, I've known Brock for over 10 years, and the work Brock and Josh and the rest of the crew, Derek, do at McKeen's Hockey is excellent work. It's one of the best draft guides out there that you can get. But not only do you get their draft guide, you get their fantasy hockey guide, you get their prospect rankings, you get their team preview for all 32 teams. And it's just, correct me if I'm wrong on the price here, Josh, because I'm going off the top of my head, but I think it's like $13 US for 3 months and $16 Canadian. And you get everything is included in that price. So I really highly recommend it to everybody. There's a wealth of information there from some great quality people like Josh. Just go to mckeenshockey.com, sign up, and really, for less than a cup of coffee a day, right? You've got a wealth of information on your fingertips. And I just wanted to put out that out there and say thank you to Josh for taking the time out and come on here and speak truthfully and honestly with no bias on where the Bruins stand.
I appreciate that, Dom. Thank you both for having me on, and I appreciate the McKeen's plug. I don't have to do it myself now.
No. I had it all planned to do it for you, buddy.
Perfect.
Well, I got to say, Dom, when you turned me on to McKeen's, I hadn't heard of them years ago, and then when you turned me on to them, it's just, like you said, just a wealth of information that's, I would say, unmatched. I mean, the in-depth that you guys do, and Dom, you and I have talked about it numerous times. A lot of people will do a little bit here and there on certain players or on certain teams and try to paint a much broader brush with that little bit of information. But Josh, what you guys do is so incredibly in-depth, and it's just it's painting the picture with that fine paintbrush that you just don't get other places. So it's incredible.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Actually, real quick, Dom, did you see David's question pop up here?
No, I didn't.
So he has a question. Is there a prospect, a top prospect, who might become available via a trade or possibly even through waivers, someone that we should be looking out for across the league that we may not know about?
Interesting.
I don't think so.
I think I can't think of anyone at the top of my head, but I mean, this is the time, right? With tough decisions coming, there's going to be a lot of action on the waiver wire soon. So it'll be interesting to say the least. That being said, I think you've already got a number of positions that are going to have competitions on their own. So maybe not needed, but I mean, there might be guys in this top 15 that could be on that list just because of that waiver issue. If you look at the goaltenders, I mean, you got Swayman, you got Korpisalo, Bussy, and DiPietro. So that's going to be something to watch how they manage that. So that'll be one I'll tell you to keep an eye on.
Yeah, for sure. And we were
I
talking.
look at it like this: if the player is truly a top prospect, a team isn't putting them on waivers. They're finding a way to keep them on the roster.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, unless they, for some reason, fall out of favor, it just doesn't tend to happen that way. Dom, do you have anything else for Josh for tonight?
No, I think we did a good job getting through the list, covering all the guys, even some that aren't on the list. Again, I just want to say thanks to Josh for taking the time out. It's been almost an hour and a half, and I think people are going to enjoy the episode.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Anytime, guys.
Again, thank you. Can't thank you enough for coming on. As you can tell, Dom and I could sit here and talk all night about the prospects, and sometimes we do. That's why we do the show. So we can't thank you enough. The insight is awesome, and hopefully we have you on many more times going forward. And then just slight programming note, Dom and I will be going live tomorrow where we will discuss some of the cuts that were made at camp today. Actually, real quick, Shaz throws a couple other names in here right at the end here. Cole Spicer and Chris Pelosi. Dom, I can't believe we didn't mention them.
Well, Spicer played the first game for Dubuque in the Fall Classic, but hasn't played since. So I really don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I don't really have anything recent on him. So I'm not sure what's going on there.
And then anything on Pelosi at all?
I have the worst memory, so I rely heavily on my notes. Let me just take a look here. I don't really have too much since the draft guide, honestly. But back then, I know we liked his goal scoring ability, his ability to drive the net, and his overall offensive instincts. But sorry, I don't have too much on him since then.
Just a couple names that more recent, of course. So any little insight helps. So I wanted to get his question up there. So, but with that, thank you again. With that, all I got is go Bruins prospects.
Yeah, go Bruins prospects.